Welcome, everyone. My name is Madeline No, and I'm with NetHope. We want to welcome you to another NetHope Solution Center webinar. Today, our topic is digital skills for a global workforce, and we're welcoming presenters from 4 organizations today: 2 NetHope member organizations, ActionAid and Catholic Relief Services, as well as IREX and Maternity Foundation. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping guidelines for the session today. Please keep this interactive. Open your chat window, place your comments and questions in the chat for our Q&A discussion at the end of the session today. Also look for a follow-up email that will include a little recap of today's session, as well as links to the recording for the session and the collateral from today's presentation. And your feedback is also very important to us. Please take a moment to complete our webinar satisfaction poll that will be presented toward the end of the webinar. And with that, I will turn it over to Sonia Rutzel from Catholic Relief Services to kick off our presentation.
Thank you very much, Madeline and NetHope, and thank you everyone for tuning in to another ICT4D conference webinar. It's a pleasure to have you on board. So after over a year of remote working, programming, and training, we thought we'd like to revisit the topic of digital skills. So today, our speakers will share good practice and lessons learned, particularly from the last year, but also some general insights on digital training and remote capacity building. We have on offer insights from various perspectives. As you can see, we have quite a diverse speaker panel. Joining us today is Nana Sten Anderson. She's an educationalist and clinical trainer at Maternity Foundation. My colleague Kunikwa Abdul Malik, she's manager of learning, design, and capacity building at Catholic Relief Services. Priscilla Shumba Quinoa, the global head of digital and technology at ActionAid, and Jesus Meleles Vicente, the Senior Technical Advisor data and Digital Development at IREX. So you can see we have a lot of expertise for you and a lot of insights. As always with our webinars, we'll start with a round of short presentations and like to invite you to ask any questions to the speakers or in general for the discussion afterwards. The second part of the webinar will be more interactive, and we like to discuss your questions and look forward to have an interactive discussion with our speakers. But without further ado, we'll get started. And our first speaker is Nana Sten Anderson from the Maternity Foundation, and she'll be sharing lessons learned on remote training with the Safe Delivery app. So Nana, over to you.
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you so much for hosting this great webinar and inviting me to share my experience. I'm very excited to be here, and I hope that we will learn a lot from each other over the next hour. My name is Nana. I'm a midwife by profession, working at the labor ward in Copenhagen, Denmark, next to my job as a clinical trainer and educationalist at Maternity Foundation. And if you take the next slide, since the beginning of this pandemic, we have been working on the best remote solutions for providing clinical training to frontline workers where most needed. We work to improve maternal and newborn health, and with the Safe Delivery app and the 14 modules on basic emergency obstetric and neonatal care, we have reached more than 6,000 skilled birth attendants with remote training so far. We try to make it as engaging and interactive and hands-on as possible, but online training definitely has its challenges and cannot completely replace the face-to-face, on-the-ground skill training. But I would like to share with you the lessons that we've learned so far. And in this picture, you can see a midwife who has become a Safe Delivery app champion, and she has received a certificate after completing the My Learning section in the app. And this is a fun and engaging way how to continue the learning streak and how to keep on refreshing and updating our knowledge on these relevant topics. On the next slide, you can see here a picture from a training with some lovely midwives in LAS. We're here making a little opening ceremony and saying hi and welcome to everyone before we turn off the cameras to provide the best possible connection for everyone. So just a little snapshot from one of my trainings, how they usually start. On the next slide, I want to emphasize that preparation is key, and one of the main advices I would like to share. It might seem like a well-known necessity when it comes to teaching, but I cannot emphasize this enough how important it is. While this also applies to, of course, in-person training, remote training participants tend to be even more time constrained and distracted. So we found that this is to be of even greater importance in the remote training setup for all the parties involved. And in our case, we work to ensure that participants download the Safe Delivery app in advance, including registering for the My Learning part of the app, and to familiarize themselves with Zoom, which is the main platform that we use for the training, and also preparing our M&E material for the follow-up on the outcome of the trainings. And together with our partners, we make sure to get an understanding of who participants are, what profession they have, educational background, the language spoken, and their location, and so on. And of course, what context they're participating in the training from. Are they alone? Are they sitting together? Are they at work, at home? And also, of course, what is the expectations and need from the end users? In this way, remote trainers can come prepared to deal proactively, and the participants can benefit as much as possible from the time they took out of their already super busy calendars to attend these trainings. I mentioned Zoom as a preparation criteria, and I think the screenshot, if you press the next slide, from one of my trainings demonstrates it very well. It's from a training with Kyrgyzstan, where all the material was translated into Russian, and actually two simultaneous translators on other channels were translating all the training into Russian. But of course, trainers need to know their way around the platform, but the participants do as well, how to raise their hand and unmute to answer questions right in the chat box. And of course, not to disturb the trainer's beautiful slides, as you see here. Eventually, I found out how to erase these lines and block the participant from interfering with my slideshow. Either she found it very boring or she unintentionally pushed a button in her pocket. I, of course, assumed the latter. But if you move to the next slide, I just want to share with you my second key point here, that length does matter. And we've tried two different training modalities so far. The short, quick webinar where you can join from anywhere, or the half to full day training where you meet up in groups and you practice more hands-on skills as well. So imagine that you're a busy, skilled birth attendant. Which modality would you prefer? Just think about it for 2 seconds. We found that participants didn't get time off from work for this 1.5-hour training, which has resulted in these people attending the training from work or from home or on their way from A to B, and this makes it even harder to concentrate. We all know that webinars can be a little bit boring, so being distracted by work or kids, noise from the bus, isn't really helping getting an important message across the screen. Also, and I think I speak for several other professions as well when I say that it's not enough to know what to do, but also how to do it, putting this knowledge into practice in an emergency situation, which we, with the longer training model, are able to facilitate. We are actually doing a pilot project in Ethiopia right now, if you take the last slide, testing these different training modalities to find out which one gives the best learning outcome, measured on knowledge retention and skill tests, and hopefully we'll know more in about 3 months or so. But here you can see me at the top right corner doing a training with my awesome colleague Maren in Ethiopia at the bottom right corner on the golden minute. The participants are here practicing how to stimulate and ventilate a baby who's not breathing after birth. And for the hands-on training, we have then on-ground trained facilitators to make sure that the participant learns the skill correctly, which can be very hard to see through a webcam. But this is actually it from my end. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm looking very much forward to hearing the rest of this great panel sharing their experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Nana, for kicking us off. It's very interesting training. And next up, we'd like to hear from Kunikwa. She will be sharing some agency-wide digital skills acknowledgement at CRS.
Thank you, Sonia. Next slide, please. All right. So as we know, COVID-19 accelerated our adoption and use of digital tools and the need to quickly upskill staff to work effectively in the virtual environment. However, before we get to the response, I want to give some sense of what CRS was doing prior to COVID. Then I'll talk briefly about some of the initiatives that rose last year to respond to the remote work environment most of our colleagues found themselves in. And finally, we'll close with what we're currently doing. Next slide, please. One of our goals is to foster a culture of learning, development, and agility. I want to emphasize that getting there requires a multi-pronged approach with collaborations from teams and functions across the agency. So there's not just one team that's responsible for us being a learning organization. In response to the results of an employee engagement survey and other data gathered showing that staff desired greater opportunities for learning and growth, the HR talent development team secured an enterprise license to LinkedIn Learning so that all staff now have access to over 10,000 online courses, which are directly accessible from within our learning management system or directly via the LinkedIn Learning website. Knowledge Management for Excellence is a group that has existed for several years, and they drive the agency-wide strategy for knowledge management and the rollout and education around things like our intranet and tools such as Office 365, which enable personal and team productivity and collaboration in the digital workplace. Prior to COVID, they were convening a group of Microsoft Teams champions that were identified from across the agency, and they were training them to support staff in the transition from Skype for Business to Microsoft Teams. And then lastly, the Partnership and Capacity Strengthening Unit, which is where I worked at the time, was in the closeout phase of the Strength and Solidarity Project, an 8-year grant-funded project, one of the aims of which was to strengthen the knowledge, skills, and attitudes of staff as they accompany partners in the process of strengthening their organizational capacity. I was one of 2 instructional designers on the team at the time. Next slide. So now we get to the rapid response that was necessary during COVID-19. And here we really tried to come together and coordinate our efforts. One of the ways that our colleagues provide support for partners and other staff is via training. So with the sudden move away from face-to-face training, one of the many questions, or many of the questions that we encountered were around how to transition to live online trainings. One of the first things that we did is to partner with 2 colleagues from Human Resources to schedule office hour sessions twice a week that colleagues could register for to get their questions answered and learn from the feedback given to others. So we found that using office hours was a great way to have a collaborative learning. You know, we often get individual emails and we're giving technical assistance and advice to individuals, and then we get a similar email and do a similar response. So by having office hours, we had people schedule, I think it was 2 or 3 colleagues could schedule to be on the phone. So there was enough time for people to get their individual questions answered, but there was also time for people to learn from some of the other questions. And then we would also publish some of any resources we shared out at office hours and ended up going on one of the sites for HR as resources that anybody could access. So during this time, there were many meetings to learn what others were doing in response and to ask what else we could do to support our colleagues to continue their work in the digital space. And next slide. And the answer was VirtualCon, which was spearheaded by a group of 4 organizers, 2 of us from Partnership and Capacity Strengthening, 1 from Human Resources, and the other for Knowledge Management for Excellence. So what we wanted to do was draw on the expertise and wide variety of experience of our colleagues. So we put out a call for presenters who could lead sessions that fell anywhere in this sort of leading, learning, or collaborating virtually. We got over 30 responses of people volunteering to lead sessions. So we ended up doing a 4-day virtual conference. And next photo. This is just an example from Wednesday of some of the sessions that were available. So you can see that there were a wide variety of topics. They were organized in the sort of tracks that were on the previous slide. And it really just gave us an opportunity to hear from people all across the agency and learn from each other. Next slide. So by the numbers, VirtualCon was 4 days long. There were over 30 presenters. There were about 40 sessions in total. There were approximately 1,300 seats filled. So that's not necessarily 1,300 individual people, but so there are some people who attended every session. There were some people who only attended 1 or 2 sessions, but total, there were about 1,300 seats filled. And when we did our follow-up survey of the respondents, more than half of them said they were able to immediately apply what they learned during VirtualCon. Next slide. So, now we're looking into 2021 and how we sustain the momentum. We did quick upskilling. We really tried to provide staff with what they need to just quickly get used to working digitally and remotely in a virtual space. But now what? So currently, HR, in response to the uptick in online learning, HR is transitioning the management of our learning management system to the IT department. They've also convened they used to make most of the learning management decisions on their own, but they've now convened a cross-divisional committee for user acceptance testing, a system roadmap, and alignment with the agency strategy. They're also providing more training to empower learning content owners to edit their pages, curate content, and run reports. And from Knowledge Management for Excellence, the Microsoft Teams Champions team on Teams, which is a little confusing sometimes, still exists. So it's still a place where the people who are Teams champions can still ask questions, get the newest updates, know what's coming out so that we can continue to support our colleagues in using the platform effectively. Knowledge Management for Excellence also recently spearheaded a third-party app survey. We wanted to see outside of the Office 365, what else our colleagues were using consistently, especially in the online training, online meeting space, that they didn't feel the need was met by Microsoft tools. And the idea was if we found that there was enough interest, we would get enterprise licensing for some of those tools so that we could also internally support that. So the result was that we ended up getting an enterprise license for Mentimeter to enable more collaboration during online meetings and trainings. And then the Knowledge Management for Excellence also continues to do office hour sessions on Office 365 tools on a regular basis. And then lastly, Knowledge Management for Overseas Operations is a new department, which I sit in, that has formed and launched in 2021. And we are focused on supporting knowledge management for our overseas operations colleagues. So we work closely with Knowledge Management for Excellence to co-facilitate the KML Community of Practice for the learning design and capacity building team within this department, which I'm the manager of specifically, we're really focusing on helping our colleagues understand how to harness the tools that we have available to us through our Microsoft subscription to effectively deliver training, especially in the virtual setting. We did a spring webinar series on training and collaboration. And lastly, next slide. We're currently in the midst of what we are calling Digital Dexterity Month. So here, the month of June, we've decided is Digital Dexterity Month. So we understand that even though many of us have become accustomed to working digitally, there are still some colleagues who, need help. So we're really focusing on those users who want to quickly upskill, get more comfortable. So we've put out a calendar of daily, like super discrete, small activities, like 2-3 minute videos that people can do at their own pace from Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Then on Thursdays, we have live webinars on the theme of the week. And then finally on Friday, we issue a challenge so that they have to try to put that in practice. And usually they'll post a screenshot of what they did on Yammer to, again, support that social learning and just help us continue to develop digital skills. So that is what we're up to now. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Kanikwa, for the overview and good example for interagency learning between the different departments, which is bringing us also to our next contribution from Priscilla from ActionAid, really continuing sort of talking about this digital skills, responsibilities, and trends and exchange within those departments. So get another insight on how ActionAid is approaching this. So Priscilla, this is over to you. But in the meantime, I also wanted to learn from the audience as well. What tools are you using to for digital training? Feel free to post those in the chat as well if you like. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. And it was really great listening to both Nana and Kanikwa. And yes, I will sort of pick up from where Kanikwa left off on multifunctional teams and learning and collaboration and so on. I think ActionAid was in somewhat a good position when the pandemic hit that forced us to shift the way we think about digital and maybe move those that were a bit reluctant much more quickly. And we had just come out of the 2019 General Assembly where all 45 member countries of the Federation had signed off on what we were calling our digital transformation framework. Next slide, please. Interestingly, we had 8 goals in that framework or strategy. We interchangeably use the terms, but 2 out of the 8 were around skills. And the first one was to ensure that every existing and new member of staff receives the skills training needed to do their jobs effectively and safely in a digital workplace. And then the next one was that we needed to prioritize the development of soft skills needed to innovate and collaborate successfully. This was before the pandemic, but the reason we separated the 2 was because we understood that we needed to separate sort of the hard digital skills from the more soft skills. And particularly because we knew as well that if we wanted to become more innovative in our work, this was not a question of IT training people or sending out materials on how to use Teams or Zoom or Planner or Yammer or whatever, but it was everybody in the organization understanding how technology could help them in their work. And so once the pandemic happened, though, we had to shift and start thinking about, we don't just address internal skills, we also need to look at the communities that we work with. I'll give 2 examples of projects that we have then launched in response to the changing environment. The first one internally was that we launched, obviously, the usual lots of training, lots of skills building through different modalities like newsletters, tips and tricks on productivity tools, webinars, workshops, all the usual things that we were already doing. But beyond that, we decided that we needed to look at building capacity beyond the pandemic and make some investments that would provide multiple benefits to the organization in the future. Next slide, please. And so we are currently implementing what we're calling the International Digital Collaboration Project. And the aim of this project is twofold. The first is to improve the way we work and interact in virtual spaces. And secondly, and potentially a key one for an organization such as ours that puts climate justice at the center of our work, it is to improve the virtual collaboration experience so that once the pandemic is over and planes are allowed to move freely again, we will see, and we're hoping that we will see a reduction in travel because staff understand how to use these tools, partners understand how to collaborate virtually properly. We don't know what the results will be, but we have collected all our travel data for the last few years, and we've looked at the patterns, we've looked at which offices had the most travel out of the 13 that we're implementing this pilot in. And we hope that going forward, we'll look again at all these trends and see whether we can sustain a reduction in our carbon footprint. We are working in 5 streams, and that is making sure hardware, software, security, learning, and adoption are all addressed. So in terms of hardware, making sure that we have the right hardware in place in terms of video conferencing equipment, audio equipment, the connectivity is adequate, and all those sorts of infrastructure pieces. On software, looking into what tools can be used to collaborate effectively. So similar to what Konigwa said, not just Zoom and Teams, but other tools such as Slido, Mentimeter, Miro, that make meetings more engaging and other collaborative activities, not just meetings, but also conducting security reviews of both our environment, but also the software tools that we're providing to everybody. And then finally, putting in place teams that will create content for the learning management system on all these areas, and particularly around collaboration in virtual spaces. And then one more team that is looking at the change management and adoption of all of this, because we're very cognizant of the fact that this is quite a bit of change for a lot of people. And while some of us might be, excited about technology, for some of us, it might also be another stress factor. So just making sure we've considered all those things. So we're still in the very early stages for these 13 countries, but I'm hoping that the next time we speak, I'll have some interesting data for you. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, shifting to remote delivery of the work that we do also led us to think about how we build skills in the communities that we're working in. This is a massive task, I must admit, and we're nowhere near to where we need to be. But just to give you an example, we had a project in 6 countries across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, where young people in those countries were working together to decide what things were affecting them during the COVID-19 pandemic. Then we partnered them with local researchers to teach them, to train them on how to collect digital data themselves. So from identifying what topics they wanted to collect the data on, to designing good questionnaires, digitizing the data collection tools, what good data collection practices are when you're using technology tools, to data aggregation and analysis. So basically just building their skills around all that and providing all the learning and support that they needed to carry out this work. The main objective of this project was that once young people see what the data coming out of their own communities is, they would take it upon themselves to advocate for their rights based on what they're observing. And we have seen some really great results with, for example, youth in Bangladesh realizing that there were inequalities in health access for young people with disabilities, and they created a viral video online that caught the attention of the authorities, and they then got an audience to discuss what the data was saying in terms of access for people with disabilities. And they got what they needed from their local leaders. So that was a big win. And this was just an 8 months project, but they were able to get quite a number, some good results in most of the countries. Now, a project like this is very exciting, but we have to remember the principles for digital development. And one of those is addressing privacy and security. And so in addition to building the skills of the young people in collecting data, we also embedded within the project comprehensive digital security training, that is currently ongoing. They have a 1-week-long training that's going into great lengths. We did a survey in all the countries in terms of what the cybersecurity situation is. And we have a trainer that's helping these young people build their capacity to speak to their friends as well and whoever they work with around digital security. And so that's part of the learning that we're doing in communities and not just internally within ActionAid. And overall, all this to say that we are seeing a blurring of lines between what the IT, and I'm using quotes for IT department, does and what the rest of the organization does. Both projects that I've described have been led by my team, which is what we call the technology team in the organization. But the project members from these teams have been from various parts of the organization. For the internal project on virtual collaboration, where we're aiming to reduce our carbon footprint, we had to bring together a project team that had HR specialists, learning specialists, knowledge management folks, and our climate justice folks, because we understood that we needed all these different skill sets to come together. We couldn't just throw some hardware and software at people and say, collaborate. We needed more input into that. And then for the youth project, the core team actually only had 2 people from my team, myself, and a project coordinator, and everybody else came from across the organization because the young people led the whole process. So we had to have the people working with the youth. We had to have experts from the themes that the young people were finding in their data to then provide advice on how we could manage it from our end. But for the most part, what we saw was that they then had to start understanding the potential that technology has, and we had to start understanding, like now you ask me about gender responsive public services, I am there for you. I will answer you, which is something going into this I previously might not have known. And just to close, I'm going to put my neck on the line here and predict that the notion of an IT department that sits in a corner of the operations team will soon be a thing of the past, and that human resources departments will actively recruit for digital skills when recruiting non-IT staff. We're already starting to see this shift. In ActionAid, we haven't had an IT or anything called IT department for a number of years now. What we have is called Digital and Technology team, and we don't sit in operations. We sit in a different department that has the communications teams, the fundraising teams, and the campaigns people. And what that has done is it has given us insight into the work they're doing, and we've been able to propose ICT for D and digital solutions because we now sit within that team, and they have been able to come to us because we sit in the same meetings. Since we're in the same what we call cluster, or others will call it department, they've been then able to come to us and say, this is what we're working on, or we know these program folks are working on this really interesting project that we think has potential for fundraising, but would like you to have a look and see what else we can do digitally. And I think that has really brought a lot of visibility into and out of our team, and we really like it. And I think it was one of the reasons we were able to deliver real value to the organization, even with a very lean team, because we were able to call upon expertise from everywhere else. Thank you for your time. That's me.
Thank you very much, Priscilla. And that's a very interesting trend. I'm very curious to see if and how or when other organizations will pick up on this as well. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your work at ActionAid. Our next speaker will complete now our journey from a specific digital training app to knowledge exchange between teams and departments, to including partners, and talking about the broader trend of digital skills. And now we will hear from Jesus about the general or sector-focused insights and guidelines from IREX, specifically with the focus around tools and barriers for inclusive digital capacity building. So Jesus, the floor or the platform is yours.
Thank you, Sonja. So hi everyone. First of all, thank you to my colleagues from the other organizations presenting. It makes my work a little bit easier, because really what I'm going to be talking about builds on a lot of things that have already been said by in the previous presentations. So I represent a team within IREX. IREX is an international development and education NGO. I represent the Center for Applied Learning and Impact, which is, in a nutshell, is a team that focuses on research and development and learning for the organization. So as part of that exercise, we've been involved over the past year or so in a number of initiatives that have aimed at building different digital skills of our workforce and on learning how is that working and what is the level of impact that these initiatives can have. But we are by no means the only team that has been working on that. So do you want to go to the next slide? So as I said, within IREX, there's a number of teams working on building skills, and within those digital skills, HR-led initiatives, we partner with Humentum, and so there are some initiatives there. IT itself, we still have an IT team that I don't think is sitting necessarily in the corner, but it certainly is a team within the operations department, and they've been absolutely critical to modernize the technology infrastructure that allows IREX to operate, and also critical in helping training the IREX workforce in topics related to information integrity, with a particular focus on cybersecurity. That won't be the focus of today, but I want to highlight the fact that IT leads on all cybersecurity related training and other information integrity issues. Programs and practices, our technical practices, communities and governance, education, leadership, and information and media, sometimes they do have their digital skills training. For instance, media literacy is something that is led by the INM practice, but that really happens at the program level depending on their needs. What I will focus on today is one strategic initiative led by the Center for Applied Learning and Impact, called the Virtual Learning Trust. I feel this is an initiative that is very much aligned with some of the previous presentations, and it was an initiative that was designed as a result of the global crisis that we're still seeing is happening in many parts of the world. And a way for us to kind of adjust our way of operating and working with programs. So next slide. So what was this Virtual Learning Trust initiative about? So the ultimate goal was basically strengthening virtual learning capacity and impact of our teams. We didn't try to reinvent the wheel to do that. As a matter of fact, this is building on what's done in programs, or what's been done in programs, in order to create tools, systems, and approaches that basically work towards strengthening this virtual learning capacity. It was only possible because of the participatory approach that we took, working, like I think some of the previous presentations said, it needed to be participatory in order to have the level of impact and scale that we wanted it to have. It also built on, actually the first of the tools that I'll talk about, built on a previous training methodology called the Essential Skills Toolkit, which aims at basically preparing program participants, not necessarily our employees, but program participants, to succeed in life, to prepare them with the skills, soft skills, hard skills, and of course within that digital skills that would allow them to succeed in their life and livelihoods. The first of the products, well, so what you see here basically is the products that were part of this virtual trust over the past year. I'll talk in particular about two of them: the online learning and collaborative guide, and the digital barriers inclusion tip sheet. And then I'll finish with with what we are currently doing on jumpstarting IREX virtual learning and knowledge sharing. Do you want to move to the next slide? Next slide. So yeah, online collaboration guide. This in particular was repurposed, let's say, as a result of COVID-19, and is building on what I said, this essential skills toolkit that I was telling earlier about, basically supporting program participants to succeed in life with the right employment skills, etc. What we did with this guide wasn't really about helping IREXers select what tools. I mean, in the end, that was the goal. But rather than starting by the tools and the solutions, we started to think first about the purpose for those tools. So by purpose, I mean whether the tools were going to be used to help to help reflect, to help connect, or to help learn, or to help monitor. So at this time, understanding that purpose was very important as a result of the discussion that we had with the rest of the organization. Secondly, and this led to the next product that I will talk about, the importance of understanding the ecosystem and the importance of understanding basically what are the needs of the audience and what are some of the barriers of the audience for that training, whether it's digital literacy, whether it's connectivity, whether it's accessibility, and inclusion in general. So really, first purpose, second audience needs before you start talking about tools. Eventually, of course, that led to so the diagnostic framework for understanding the needs of the audience led to the tools themselves, and we basically ultimately created a matrix of tools per function, learning application, purpose, and then the different options of tools, which you can see a snapshot there. Together with that, we did create a deployment plan for organizations for program teams and for individuals to learn how to basically deploy some of these tools, whether it was as a standalone or whether it was a combination of tools, say a file sharing tool, together with a communication tool, together with a collaboration tool, together with a data collection tool, as an example. So this is the online collaboration guide. Next slide. Now, the process that the Center for Applied Learning and Impact follows when it comes to deploying or to designing these products is not necessarily linear in the say that we design the product and that's it. We continuously communicate and try to get feedback with regards to how our people are using. Someone earlier talked about adoption. Absolutely. I mean, there is no question that unless we're constantly focusing on active use of those tools, adoption is not going to happen in the way we want it to happen, which is ultimately leading to impacting our programs. So when we started to collect feedback from IREXers using the online collaboration tool, we realized a lot of their feedback came back to inclusion. There was a need for us to more purposely address issues related to inclusion with a dedicated sort of guide or guidelines that would allow our employees and the different programs to purposely design the use of those tools as part of a virtual learning exercise, as part of a virtual learning program activity that they would be leading. So as a result of that, we developed this inclusion tip sheet. This has just literally been released by IREX, and as a matter of fact, we have released an external version that is published on our website, and we're trying to get feedback from not only IREXers but external audiences as well that will tell us, what else are they doing in order to address inclusion. Inclusion here, by the way, is defined by many means. Is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Is accessibility. Is the ability for us to reach to participants with low levels of literacy, to reach participants in low bandwidth environments, and to reach participants in closed environments, in places where the need for enhanced security and safety in the use of these tools is critical. Do you want to go to the next slide? Excellent. So, as I said, this I'm not going to go through these bullet points, but this is for just to share with the audience some of the feedback that as we keep engaging with IREXers and developing these tools, these are some of the things, some of the feedback that we're getting from their experience in using some of these tools that allow them to operate in a virtual space and in a virtual environment. So things like just-in-time learning, people want simple, concise knowledge products and tools to be used. Very, very important storytelling and case studies, basically leading with case studies, leading with how are these tools and these approaches and these methods being used elsewhere. And then, I mean, something else that leads me to towards the end of my presentation, the importance of developing a knowledge hub that is optimized for search, that is personalized to some extent, and that basically allows them to facilitate knowledge sharing, but also access to all the different learning products and tools. Next slide. So lessons learned so far for us. First of all, and I think the first presentation addressed this already, it is critical to adopt a learning culture in order to succeed in any capacity building exercise. I think it's even more important when you're trying to build or upskill your workforce on digital skills, because digital really is a transformation exercise. And so I think learning plus change management, as I said, that is absolutely critical to succeed in building digital skills capacity. Secondly, that participatory design doesn't end with the development of a product. And when I mean product, I mean a tool for learning, an approach, and a method. It has to continue. Engagement with IREXers and with the programs that they're managing needs to continue beyond the development of these approaches. And we must focus on usage and knowledge sharing in order to achieve basically active use of these methods. So we build it and they will come doesn't really work. The need to prioritize cultivating habits and practices is something very critical and something that we're focusing right now. And then strategic cross-unit collaboration. This is not a matter of the Center for Applied Learning and Impact, the IT team, the HR team, or the practices working in silos. We must work together towards delivering the sort of learning culture and in this case digital skills training that we want. And also, last but not least, in terms of lessons, the digital skills training tools, in my opinion, it will be, or the future of digital skills training will be an omni-channel approach to training. And by that I mean, it's a training that will happen anywhere, anytime, and will be accessible by almost any device, and will be a combination of physical face-to-face training with virtual-led instructor training, with self-paced training, etc., etc. Next slide, and I think final. Yeah, in terms of future trends, look, I mean, I think having, based on what I've seen in IREX, based on what I've seen in recent conferences like the Global Digital Development Forum and others, the trends haven't really changed in terms of focus on data literacy, which is another area that I didn't talk about today, but IREX is also focusing building what we call data for leaders skills, and as well as data functional data literacy, especially as a result of using many digital tools that are producing a lot of data. So this is always going to be on demand. Responsible data goes with that. Digital accessibility is something that is also increasing, and then specific technologies. GIS is there, data collection tools for M&E, and for more than M&E is there. But here in this slide, I'm presenting one of two digital skills standards that have recently started to gain a lot of traction. This one is called the Digital Intelligence Competence Framework by DQ Institute. It has recently been approved by the IEEE organization as a standard for digital skills training, and it's a standard that many governments and private sector organizations are starting to take to train their digital workforce. Now, we are not using this standard, but when we look at the competences at the center of the standard, so competences are 1 to 24, we've already done 14, online communication and collaboration. We've already working on several cybersecurity ones. We're also working on media and information literacy, number 7, as part of our Learn to Discern program. So without knowing, we are already building competences of our workforce that is helping them to basically succeed, not only in IREX, to be honest with you, but in life. And I think standards like these have to be the future of digital skills for our global workforce, because I think we need to think of our workforce just as what they are. They are citizens at the end of the day. And I think part of our responsibility has to be to train them to succeed in future life, whether it's within our organizations or beyond our organizations. So I think adopting these kind of standards more purposely, using cross-collaboration approach, and as someone else said, really bringing up digital skills training, whether it's IT, technology, or else to the front of our strategies will be critical moving forward. So I'll leave it there and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jesus, and thank you for all our speakers. We have a number of questions in the chat. We'll see how we get through those. So some of them are, there's particularly a few questions. Maybe I'll just start with asking Nana, but I have a, so maybe also like to invite the other speakers to share their thoughts. Nana, you already mentioned earlier how busy the midwives are and how difficult it is to kind of like get the timing of the training right. But maybe in a more broader sense, one of the question was, how do you make sure they discover the new tools and the training and support that is available? And do you have any advice on really getting people on board for taking up this training?
Thank you, Sonia. So as I mentioned, preparation is really the key to these trainings that we provide so far, and a lot of the preparation is also finding the participants, which are partners, both the external partners and the local partners in the countries help finding. It can both be in-service and pre-service participants, and making sure that they get all the information regarding downloading the app, and also what to expect from these trainings. So I definitely think it's super important and hard work to get the attention from these participants and engage them in the training. But yeah, sending out the information and making sure that the local partners and collaboration partners all over the place do as much legwork before training as possible to make sure that the midwives, they know when the training is and what to expect from it. And one of the things that we've done for the shorter trainings is to pre-record it so that they're able to watch it anytime that fits into their busy calendar, instead of this online, more interactive approach. So this is one of the things that we've done to make sure to provide the trainings to most people possible and fit it into their calendars.
Thank you. And my next question is maybe for Konnichiwa, but also I'd like to open this to the other speakers as well. How do you find out about the needs of the staff? So particularly if there are any hidden needs, sort of the thing people don't know that could benefit them. Have you done a survey, or how did you approach this?
So there's a variety of ways. Oftentimes, one of the roles that when we do technical assistance is that we just get a lot of emails, and we can start to see trends of people asking questions. So in some instances, we may do a survey to kind of feel for the needs and try to be proactive. But a lot of of it, especially within the most recent environment, was just starting to see trends and the questions that people are asking, people reaching out, and just trying to be responsive to those, and then start to develop learning products or things that respond to some of the problems that we notice.
Anyone have a different approach to identifying the needs?
I mean, I can just say, I mean, or add to that, that when it comes to development of products within the Center for Applied Learning and Impact, we follow a very agile approach. We use different sort of what we call a sprints to connect with basically anyone that is interested from across the organization, and provide different sort of learning surveys and reports as we go along, including something called Learning Insights. But I think agile and participatory is working very well for us, and gets people very engaged.
And one question more specifically for you, Jesus. How
Sure.
do you create that high visibility for your resources? Any specific tips?
Yeah, so I mean, for the most part, when I call about recent IT modernization, we've moved to an environment that is mainly Microsoft. We use a number of places, let's say, where, I mean, short answer is being multi-channel is one thing. So not everyone finds the information in the same place. And so you have to use the likes of channel. We stopped doing email calendar or sending people email calendars. We use SharePoint to create events, and then people can actually download if they want to participate in an event. And what we're doing now, and this is probably, I think what we think is going to be a key differentiator in creating high visibility resources, is an initiative called Jumpstarting IREX Virtual Learning and Knowledge Sharing. It's basically a knowledge hub within SharePoint, but again, it's been designed as a product after we collected lots of feedback from across the organization. And so again, very kind of human-centered design, if that makes sense. And we hope to be making a difference with them in terms of visibility.
Thank you. We also have a question around funding. I would like to ask Priscilla first, but again, if anybody has a different approach, please do also share. Priscilla, how is ActionAid funding these digital training efforts? Is it an overhead, or are there external funding, external or internal funding resources available?
It's a bit of a mix of both, but what we used primarily were repurposed funds from travel. Once we realized that the pandemic was going to cause us to reduce the travel, we very quickly made a decision that would look at what was supposed to have been used, put together some different travel budgets. And fortunately, some member countries also brought forward their country budgets for travel, and we invested in these projects. That's the quick answer.
Thank you so much. And I just looking at the time and I'm realizing a quick answer was fantastic for this, because unfortunately we're already very close to the end of our webinar. That time has flown, but we do have a few more questions from the audience, and we will look to see if we can address those in a follow-up documentation, because they take a little bit longer to answer, I assume. Which just leaves me to really saying a big thank you to our speakers for sharing their insights and their different approaches, for also being so forward, and thank you, NetHope, for hosting us. So anybody attending, thank you for your time. And before you leave, please do fill out our feedback survey so we know what we can do differently, like next time, to make this a very good online training session. And also, yeah, feel free to also join and tune in into our ICT4D podcast. We currently have various interviews around digital diversity, equity, and inclusion. That leaves me with a big thank you, and have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you to all the attendees for joining us today. As Sonia mentioned, please take a moment to complete our satisfaction survey. Your feedback is very important. Look for that follow-up email that will include a link to the recording and the presentation slides from the session today. And with that, have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.